Okay, revisiting the skull, we're back to the external surface here. I just want to wrap things up and do a quick review, and then we want to actually look at the inside of the neurocranium, and we may be able to help identify some of the areas we've already become familiar with. So just a quick review, we have our external bones. We have our frontal bone, parietal bone, temporal bone, and occipital bone. Now, what you'll notice on the skulls is that there are these squiggly looking lines. We call those sutures. So that's actually where the bones are meeting. There's limited movement at all in those. They're designed to be very fit together very well, but it does allow, especially in development, for our skull to be able to expand as we grow. So each one of these sutures has specific names here, and let's start with the easiest one first, at least what I feel is the easiest one, and that would be the one just posterior to the frontal bone. So it's matching the frontal bone with the parietal bone here, and we call that the coronal suture. And if you remember from our first days in anatomy class, we already had talked about the frontal plane is also called the coronal plane. So this is in the frontal plane, if you will, matching the frontal plane or coronal plane of the body. So we'll remember that as our coronal suture. We can take that same logic as we look at the superior aspect of the skull, and we have the squiggly suture line here separating the two parietal bones, and that suture line is called our sagittal suture. Alright, and that makes sense because it's in alignment with the sagittal plane of the body. Now if we take this sagittal plane and we take it all the way back posteriorly, so now we're looking at our occipital bone, where our parietal bones and our occipital bones meet, we have almost forming like an upside down Y. So you've got a suture line coming out this way and a suture line coming out this way from our sagittal suture. We call this our lambdoidal suture. Lambdoidal suture on either side. And that's really kind of marking the territory or boundary, if you will, of the occipital bone. Now, if we take the skull and we open it up, so we're taking our neurocranium, opening it up so that we can see inside, and let me orient this so anterior is facing upward. And we can start to identify some structures, some of these structures we've already identified, others we still need to discuss. So within our frontal bone, right in between here, this is a portion, let's see if you can see that better, this is a portion of the ethmoid bone. And there's a couple landmarks that I want you to be able to identify. Number one, the crista galli, which is this little protuberance right here sticking out, and it's going in a superior direction. So that's our crista galli. And then next to that is our cribiform plate. And you can see how that's situated right in between the shape there of our frontal bone. Okay, if we go a little bit further posteriorly, we are running into our butterfly-like shaped bone, which we already identified as our sphenoid bone. And just a quick review from this perspective on some of the foramen and canals that we can identify. The most superior on either side would be our optic foramen. Just inferior to that, we should see our superior orbital fissure. Okay, let's get a view of this side. our superior orbital fissure. If we go just inferior to that, we run into the foramen rotundum. Foramen rotundum. If we travel just a bit further posterior and a little bit lateral, we have our oval-shaped foramen ovale, and then again just posterior and lateral to that is our foramen spinosum here. Okay, so we also have some foramen that we had identified earlier as well, and that would include, if we look here, we can see our temporal bone, and this is the petrous portion of our temporal bone. So this canal actually is an extension of our external acoustic meatus. So this portion right here would then be our internal acoustic meatus. Right here, let me zoom in so that you can see the internal acoustic meatus coming off the temporal bone, pictured here. And here it is on the opposite side. Okay, so that basically forms our ear canal. If we travel just inferior to that, we can begin to see the formation of our jugular foramen, which is right here. Pictured right there. And here we can see it on the other side. And then, very difficult to see, let me see if I can configure this, but this would then be our hypoglossal canal, and that would be located right before we get to this big, let's see if you can see it better. Here's our hypoglossal canal, and then our foramen magnum. So that concludes kind of a look at the skull, and next we'll take a peek at some of the bony structures and landmarks of the face and jaw.